Hi, everybody. I'm Gwendolyn Sterk of Sterk Family Law, and we are very thankful today to have Seth Matus of the Matus Law Group and Law Office with us. Hi, Seth.
Hi, Gwen. How are you this afternoon?
We're good. You know, what weird times we're in with this COVID-19 pandemic, right?
It's like what people have said. It's not something our parents ever dealt with. It's not something our grandparents have dealt with. It's a whole new ballgame right now.
Whole new world, and I feel like we're kind of in a catch-up game with all the technology and everything, but trying to move forward. So, I'm a small business, you're a small business, and I know that there is a lot of issues on the employer side of these employment law issues. So Seth runs an employment law practice, and he does other services as well. But primarily, we wanted to reach out to you, Seth, to get some answers for our various clients and associates that we can share with regard to small businesses. So I really want to target today on those individuals who operate an essential business. Fair enough?
Fair enough. Yeah, let's start with essential businesses.
Very good. So my first question is, are employers required to protect employees from catching the COVID-19 pandemic virus?
So, Gwen, this is really an evolving issue. I think it's probably a best practice of any employer, if you're open at this point, try your best to follow all of the CDC guidelines, whether we're talking about spacing, allowing people to wear protective gear. That might be something which is absolutely necessary depending on your business. The concern and what's been happening is that the OSHA, the Occupational Health and Safety Agency, has been beginning to look into this. And certainly employers who are not following CDC guidelines, they're getting more and more possible exposure under laws such as OSHA.
Okay. Interesting. Now, if you're an employer and you have an employee that you suspect has COVID-19, what should you do in that instance?
This gets tricky.
Sure does.
But basically, what I would do, you have an ability and a right to actually test the employee in that situation. I mean, you can take his or her temperature. You can always go forward and try to see if, really, is it, more than just the employee's hunch? Is there really something there?
Okay.
When you do that, you need to keep in mind that that information has become a medical record, and those records need to be kept confidential. And so what happens is you kind of need to balance the privacy of that medical record with the need to, save your business, to notify the other employees. And basically what I would recommend is you tell the other employees who have been in touch and in contact with that employee that someone in the group may have COVID-19. And so everybody needs to take appropriate protection. And if at all possible, you should send all of those employees home to self-quarantine, because there is a possibility that they have been exposed.
Wow.
At the same time, you still need to keep that confidential to a degree. Now, once you've done that, let's assume that you have enough, people who could come back into the office and fill that space where the other employees had been. Before you do that, make sure you follow all the CDC guidelines in terms of disinfecting the space, doing everything possible to make sure that whatever coronavirus might still be floating around has been cleaned up, at least to government guidelines.
That's a whole nother layer of work that has to be considered. So now, what should an employer do with respect to an employee who's reluctant to work? Because I'm sure that's occurring as well during the pandemic because of their fear of the virus or for whatever other reason there may be.
Well, here's the thing, Gwen. It's not something where automatically you just have to defer to the employee. Sure, there's a lot of people who are scared, and rightfully so. But especially if you're running an essential business, you still have to keep your doors open.
Right.
And so basically, employees are only entitled. There is the new Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and employees might point to that, but they're only allowed to take a leave of absence if they have a qualifying reason. Just being afraid is not a qualifying reason. And so if you have an employee who's refusing to come into work because they're afraid of coronavirus, there really is no difference. You can treat that employee in the same way as you would treat an employee who refuses to come into work for any other reason. Or maybe they
Wow,
don't.
it's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Some real interesting issues. So now let's change the hypothetical and go to an employer who has issues because employees are now working from home. So we're going to change it up a little bit. What should the employers tell their employees to do to protect company confidential information?
So Gwen, this is a really interesting issue, and it's going to be an important issue. When you think about all the different confidential information that most businesses have, whether financial or sales information, all of that before, a company was able to sort of keep sheltered. You know, either it was behind company's own firewall or in file drawers. All of that information is now being shared in employees' personal computer systems and emails and, you know, Zoom calls like what we're doing right now.
Right.
So what I really strongly counsel any employer to do is to really talk to their employees about what they're doing in terms of home computer security. Make sure all employees have their computers password protected. Make sure they're using firewalls. And all of those are really basic kind of things, but you'd be surprised how many employees don't know about that or don't know what to do. So there's a lot of educating that needs to go on. That's sort of on the level of a personal computer, but then aside from that, when employees are communicating with each other, I mean, when they send emails back and forth, emails are actually really easy to hack into. And certainly if an employee is sharing confidential information via email, that's a real risk. So instead, what needs to happen is an employer should have some sort of file transfer service, whether we're talking about Dropbox or Box, or, you know, sometimes there can be dedicated services, but that way you can make sure that the bad guys don't have easy access to any of your confidential information.
Sure. And, you know, we know, pandemic or not, there's a lot of people out there that are preying on the situation. So that's really good advice for everybody to consider. Now, what if you're an employer and you suspect that an employee that you have is not actually working at home, alleging they're working, and you're concerned about what's being done and if that's fair to the other employees in your group? So tell us about that.
Also, that's another big issue right now. What people are saying, a lot of employers, is that there's quite a few employees who are working from home and they're treating it sort of like it's a vacation, or they're treating it like a blizzard, and so we don't really work. But I would say basically the same thing about employers who are operating essential businesses. If you have an employee who you don't think is working, and if the employee is not sick with COVID or somehow unable to work and falling within the leave laws, right, to take action, whatever kind of disciplinary action you think is appropriate against that employee. And so if that's the case, if the employee is not working and none of those issues are present, discipline him or her.
Got it. Well, you know, then we get into that next category, which I think is really important for small businesses. And, you know, it's affected many of them. It's these SBA loan issues. So do you know what the current status is today of the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program?
Okay, Gwen. Yeah, actually, here we are. For the record, we're talking about April 20th. It's about 3:45. I checked the news 20 minutes ago.
Okay.
And actually, as of that time, the government, Congress has still not passed additional funding for the, they call them the CARES Act. That would be the SBA loan program, these emergency SBA loans.
Right.
It's definitely a fluid situation. Everybody thinks it's going to happen, but employers really should be watching the news at all times to see what happens. And the reason why is with the first round, the money came in and it was in and out.
Right.
And if you want to take advantage, I mean, be ready to jump when it does down the pike.
Sure, that's really good advice. You know, what obligations does an employer have to agree to if he or she wants to take out that loan?
So, Gwen, the main purpose why most businesses are taking those loans is that they can be forgiven. If you follow the criteria, you can actually not have to pay back the loan. But the idea of it is they are payroll protection loans.
Right.
What that means is that you need to maintain your employees. You can't be letting people go. And that's what becomes troublesome. So that's step number one. And then the second part of that is that what you're using the loans for, you have to be sure that at least 75% of the loan proceeds go towards payroll. And, you know, that might include things like benefits too, but it has to be at least 75 towards your employees. The remaining part you can use for things, say, like if you have an existing lease. I mean, that might be something.
Sure.
The vast bulk needs to be used towards payroll.
Right. I even heard a recommendation that maybe you should, if you do get the money, put it in a new bank account so that you can earmark and can clearly illustrate what you're using that money for. And then you also have to take the distinction between the Payroll Protection Act, that's compared with some of the emergency loan relief, which you would have to pay back. And then there's also a third available, which is to defer payments for a period of time for SBA loans that you had pre-existing the COVID-19 crisis. So it's real important that you get good information on that. I understand that it's important. So last thing is that you're an employer out there and you're listening today and you say, wait a minute, first they said I had to apply at my bank, then I tried, I just gave up. What advice do you have about an existing business going after one of these loans?
Well, first of all, make sure if you're an employer who wants one of these loans that your preferred lender is SBA qualified. I mean, it is only for SBA lenders. What I've seen though is that the other bit of advice that I'd have is you might try some of the smaller lenders because they seem to be a little bit more responsive to small businesses. Certainly the really large banks, they're SBA qualified, but I've heard a number of horror stories of people who try and just don't get any kind of response whatsoever. So I actually have seen better odds if you're applying through, say, like some credit unions, if they're SBA qualified, or a smaller institution.
Got it.
Now, again, what I'd say regardless, act fast. Just be very ready to jump on these once Congress funds the money. You're going to, any employer is going to have to make the typical kind of certifications about, financial status, but it's actually easier compared to most business loans. So it should be something that most employers should be able to complete very quickly. And, again, act fast.
Act fast. So if you do have questions about this, I do have another resource. If you're a member of a local chamber of commerce, many of the chambers are putting out some good information, as well as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So if you're not a member, I always urge employers to take, hold of that. Sometimes we have different opinions about the value of the chambers, but clearly today, I think that they've been a real asset as well. So if you have questions out there and you're an employer and you're wondering, what do I do in this situation? What do I do with an employee's concern? How do I approach the situation? You can always reach out to Seth and he can give you some good advice. So Seth, tell everybody how it is that they can get a hold of you to try to work through some of these issues as well.
Sure. So you can either email me, and my email address is Seth, SETH.Matus, MATUS, at MatusLawOffice, all one word, .com, or just give me a phone call. And my phone number is area code 630-470-6875.
That's great. And, as a family law practitioner, we have a lot of clients, for various reasons, have various sizes of small businesses, and everybody's being affected. Whether you're a friend, a client, whatever avenue, we know you, or if you're listening to this video today, please take advantage of the information that we can provide and help you. We reach out. If there is somebody that is inquiring, we give free consultations. I know you can reach out to Seth. Don't sit back. Get in information. I think that knowledge is power, and especially in these times, we need to be careful that we are communicating with experts who can give us the details and the information that we need. So thanks so much for your time today, Seth. We really appreciate it, and we hope that anybody listening has been empowered to take action for the good of their small business.
Thanks for the opportunity, Gwen.